Getting rich color variation on your terrain usually means a lot of texture work. Gradient Lookup in Polaris does it automatically, using your terrain's height and slope. Here's how to set it up. So how it works. Gradient Lookup computes terrain color from two gradients. The first reads the surface normal, how much each face is pointing upward, to distinguish cliffs from flat ground. The second reads elevation to define altitude zones. A curve then controls how the two blend together at each height level. On top of that, you can paint an albedo map and a metallic map for additional detail. The first thing to do is to set your terrain shading mode to Gradient Lookup. Select your terrain. In the Material and Texture section, click on the Context menu, then Set Shader. In the wizard window, scroll down and set Texturing Model to Gradient Lookup. Click Apply. The terrain has some color now. In Gradient Lookup shading mode, the most important parameters are color by normal, color by height gradient, and blend by height curve. They are responsible for generate color for the terrain in real time using normal vectors and height level. The blend by height curve will mix normal base color and height base color at a certain height level, where at 0, height color wins, and at 1, normal color wins. We will play around with color by normal first, so I will set this curve to a straight line at 1. The first gradient works from the surface normal, how much each face is pointing upward. Flat ground sits at the beginning of the gradient and steep cliffs at the end. Let's say I want to have dark gray for bare rock at the cliffs. I'll add a stop here. Then there will be green color where things grow. At flat area, I'll add a stop here. You can add more stops if you like, or reposition them to define how color transition looks. Terrain color will adapt automatically. Next, we'll try the color by height gradient. Before touching the gradient, we need to set the blend curve to be a straight line at 0, so we can see color by height at full strength. The second gradient maps color to elevation. You can think of it as slicing the terrain vertically. The bottom of the gradient represents the lowest point. The top represents the highest. So here I'm placing yellow sand at the low end, where the riverbed sits. Transitioning into green through the mid-range where the slopes level out. and then white at the top for snow on the peaks. As the terrain gets taller, it automatically picks up the right color from the gradient. No brushwork, no layers, just set the colors once and every part of the terrain falls into place. One thing to watch out for: the gradient maps across the full height range of your terrain asset, from 0 all the way up to the maximum height setting. But your actual terrain might only occupy a small slice of that range. Maybe it never gets close to the top, or the whole thing sits somewhere in the middle. In that case, you're only sampling a narrow portion of the gradient, and some colors may never appear. The fix is to adjust your gradient stops to match where your terrain actually lives. Pull them in so the full gradient is compressed into the height range your terrain uses. That way, every color gets a chance to show up. This curve controls how the two gradients blend together across elevation. When the curve is low, the height gradient takes over. When it's high, the normal gradient takes over. So by shaping this curve, you decide at which altitude each gradient has the most influence. For example, here I'm keeping the curve low at the bottom and the top, so the riverbed reads as sand and the peaks as snow regardless of slope. Then I raise it in the mid-range, letting the normal gradient take over where the cliffs are, so steep faces go dark gray while flat areas stay green. The gradient system gives you a solid color base across the whole terrain, but sometimes you need a bit more detail in specific spots. That's where the albedo overlay comes in. You can paint color directly on top of the gradient, so if you want to add a dirt path, a mossy patch, or any custom markings, you just paint it in and it sits on top of everything. And the same goes for metallic and smoothness. You can paint those values where you need them, like adding a wet, rocky surface along the riverbed or a shiny ice patch near the peaks. The gradient handles the broad strokes, and these maps let you add the finishing touches. To do that, I'll create a new painter. Right-click on the hierarchy, then select 3D Object, Polaris, Paint Tools, Geometry, Texture Painter. I'll use the albedo smoothness in metallic mode to paint some detail. And that's gradient lookup shading. 2 gradients, 1 curve, and optional detail painting on top. A simple setup that takes your terrain from flat gray to a fully colored scene in just a few minutes. If you found this useful, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.